It was a few minutes before midnight on a rainy Tuesday in July 1964. Tiny Tim's palms were sweating as he gripped the cold metal of his revolver. A massive bounty of $100,000 had been placed on the life of Bumpy Johnson by the city's most powerful crime bosses. Tim had been Bumpy Johnson's personal protector for nearly a decade. They were closer than blood, yet Tim had agreed to do the job. The setup was easy. He would enter the velvet basement, wait for Bumpy Johnson to look away, and fire a single bullet into the base of his skull. Then, he would vanish into the shadows. Tim stepped inside. Bumpy Johnson was sitting at his usual corner booth. His back was wide open. Tim pulled out his gun, took steady aim, and squeezed the trigger. Click. The gun jammed. The entire club went dead quiet. Bumpy Johnson turned his chair around without any rush. He stared straight into Tim's soul and spoke 5 words that people still talk about today. "I was waiting for this." Most people don't realize that Bumpy Johnson had found out about the betrayal a month earlier. The moves he made during those few weeks didn't just keep him breathing, they completely flipped the script on who ran the streets. To truly get what happened that night at the Velvet Basement, you have to realize who Bumpy Johnson was back in the mid-60s. He wasn't some common criminal. He was the king of the neighborhood, the only thing standing between the people and the monsters trying to tear the community apart. In those days, the neighborhood was being attacked from the outside. A massive coalition of out-of-town syndicates had been trying to seize control of the local gambling scene for a long time. There was a fortune to be made in the neighborhood's daily lottery. Small change from the poor that turned into a mountain of gold. These outsiders wanted it all. But Bumpy Johnson was the roadblock. He had built a kingdom based on something the outsiders didn't get: true loyalty. When a single mother couldn't buy groceries, Bumpy Johnson filled her fridge. When crooked cops shook down local shops, Bumpy Johnson made a single call to get them off their backs. When foreign thugs tried to bully local shopkeepers, Bumpy Johnson sent them to the hospital. The syndicates had tried every trick in the book. They sent their best hitmen, and Bumpy Johnson sent them home in boxes. They tried to talk deals, but Bumpy Johnson told them the neighborhood didn't belong to them. They tried to buy off the mayor, but Bumpy Johnson had more powerful friends. By 1964, the bosses were backed into a corner, and that's when they decided to do something truly reckless. Lorenzo Valli, the top kingpin in the city, gathered the leaders of the rival syndicates for a secret sit-down. The only item on the agenda was how to deal with Bumpy Johnson. Valli spoke with a voice like grinding stones, telling the room that muscle, bribes, and political favors had all failed. Bumpy Johnson was like a ghost. Nobody could lay a finger on him. "How do we break him then?" asked Carmine Russo, puffing on a thick cigar. Valli leaned over the table, his eyes dark. "We find the one man he would bet his life on, and we buy him." That was when a name came up: Tiny Tim. Timothy Foster had been Bumpy Johnson's shadow since 1960. He was a giant of a man, built like a brick wall, and known for his absolute devotion. He had jumped in front of gunfire for Bumpy Johnson twice. He held Bumpy Johnson's hand when his father passed away. He had survived the street wars and the precinct raids right by his side. If there was a single person on Earth who could get within arm's reach of Bumpy Johnson with a weapon, it was Tim. The syndicate sent a man named Rico the recruiter to handle the job. Rico didn't use a baseball bat, he used a microscope to find a man's breaking point. Everyone has a price, and Rico was an expert at finding it. In mid-June, about 20 days before the incident at the club, Tim was stepping out of his flat on 5th Avenue when a sleek midnight blue sedan drifted to the curb. The glass slid down to reveal Rico, looking more like a friendly banker than a mobster. "You're Tim, right? The legendary Tim? I've heard you're the best in the business," Rico said with a grin. Tim's hand instinctively twitched toward the holster tucked in his belt. "Who wants to know?" "A well-wisher," Rico replied, waving toward the open door. "Just 5 minutes of your time. If you hate the pitch, you leave, and we never speak again. No drama." Tim knew he should have kept walking, but his mind was heavy with worry. He climbed into the leather seat. Rico didn't dance around the point. "Look, Tim, You're a man of honor. Everyone knows you're Bumpy Johnson's right hand. But honor doesn't pay for a specialist, Rico said. Tim felt his stomach drop. His little girl, Maya, had been fighting a severe lung infection for nearly a year. The private doctors were draining him dry. The debt was a mountain that kept growing. Bumpy Johnson had handed him $5,000 without a second thought, but in the world of high-end medicine, that was just a drop in the bucket. Rico clicked open a heavy leather bag. It was stuffed with crisp, high-value notes. There is $100,000 in here. It covers the surgery. It covers a new house in the countryside where the air is fresh. It gives your girl a future. Tim stared at the money, his voice a low growl. And what do I have to do for it? He already knew the answer. A single round, a single second. You head into the velvet basement on the night of July 7th. Bumpy Johnson is a creature of habit. He'll be there. You wait for the right moment. One shot to the skull. Fast and professional. Then you vanish. We'll have a getaway driver ready and fresh papers for your wife and kid. By sunrise, you're in another state. By next month, you're a new man with a clean slate. Tim stared at the piles of cash. The $100,000 meant his little girl lived. It meant his family escaped the gutter. All it took was one flick of the finger. And if I walk away? Tim whispered. Rico's grin vanished. Then your kid fades away in a cramped clinic. You stay Bumpy Johnson's shadow, looking over your shoulder until the day a bullet finds you too. Because that's the only way this story ends, Tim. You can die a pauper or live like a king. The choice is yours. Tim exited the vehicle without a word, but the bag remained in his grip. Rico had left it open, the green ink of the bills glowing in the streetlights. That night, Tim didn't close his eyes once. He pictured Maya struggling for air, her tiny hand reaching for his. He saw the money, the ticket to her survival and a better world. 3 days later, Tim picked up the phone and dialed the secret number. I'll do it, he rasped. But I want 50 grand tonight. The rest when he's gone. Deal, Rico said. Smart move, Tim. You're with the winners now. But Tim was walking into a trap he couldn't see. He didn't realize that before he had even stepped into that sedan, Bumpy Johnson was already steps ahead. Bumpy Johnson hadn't stayed on top by being a fool who trusted blindly. He stayed on top because he studied the human heart. He knew everyone had a breaking point, a secret need, or a price tag. Bumpy Johnson had a web of eyes that covered every inch of the pavement. The guys cleaning the floors, the men shining shoes, the taxi drivers, and the kids on the corner. People the big shot syndicates ignored. One of those eyes belonged to a valet named Arthur. Arthur had spotted the midnight blue sedan idling outside Tim's building. He watched Tim get in and out. He memorized the tags. A few hours later, Arthur was standing in Bumpy Johnson's private office above a local jazz spot. That was Rico the recruiter's car, Arthur said, handing over a scrap of paper. It was at Tim's place this morning. Tim was inside for 5 minutes. Bumpy Johnson looked at the plate number, then back at Arthur. You're certain it was Rico? I'd bet my life on it, Arthur replied. I've spotted that guy before. He does the rounds for the out-of-towners over on the east side, Arthur noted. Bumpy Johnson sat in a heavy silence. Eventually, he reached into a drawer, pulled out $1,000, and slid it toward Arthur. You were never here. You saw nothing. Got it. Clear as day, Mr. Johnson, Arthur said, taking the cash and vanishing. For the next 2 hours, Bumpy Johnson sat alone in the dark office, thinking. Tim had stood by him for years. They were battle-tested allies. Bumpy Johnson had put his very survival in Tim's hands more times than he could count. But now, the sharks were circling Tim. Bumpy Johnson knew that when a man is cornered by life, he stops thinking straight. Bumpy Johnson could have ended Tim in a heartbeat. A quick snap of his fingers, and Tim would be at the bottom of the bay by sunrise. Most bosses would have done exactly that, cut out the cancer and keep moving. But Bumpy Johnson operated differently. For the following 3 weeks, Bumpy Johnson kept a close watch on his bodyguard. He noticed Tim's jittery movements. He saw the haunting sadness in Tim's gaze. He was watching a man torn between his soul and his family's lives. Bumpy Johnson made a call. He wasn't going to execute Tim, he was going to school him. He reached out to a master mechanic and gunsmith in Jersey named Silas, who had been fixing Bumpy Johnson's gear for over a decade. "I have a specific job for you," Bumpy Johnson told him. "I need a piece that is a total dud." Silas scratched his head. "You want me to give you a broken heater?" "Not just broken. It has to look and feel like the real deal. It needs to be perfect in every way, but when that trigger is pulled, it needs to do absolutely nothing. No spark, no bang. Just a dead click." "A prop gun?" Silas asked. "A very realistic prop. Can it be done?" Silas nodded. 3 days later, he handed over a snub-nosed revolver that was a twin to the one Tim carried. It had the same balance and the same weight, but the internal firing pin had been shaved down to nothing. The next step was the swap. Bumpy Johnson needed to trade Tim's real weapon for the fake without raising a single red flag. He waited until July 3rd, just a few days before the planned hit. Bumpy Johnson sent Tim on a long-distance run to the outskirts of the city. "I need you to grab a package from a guy in the valley," Bumpy Johnson commanded. "It's high priority. Stay there until he hands it over." That trip would keep Tim busy for half the day. It was all the time Bumpy Johnson needed. While Tim was on the road, Bumpy Johnson and his closest confidant, a man called Slim, let themselves into Tim's flat. They found the revolver tucked away in a drawer near the bed. They made the switch, leaving the useless replica in its place. Tim would never feel the difference. Now, the stage was set. Bumpy Johnson just had to sit back and wait for Tim to decide his own fate. If Bumpy Johnson had called Tim out before the deed, Tim could have simply lied. The syndicates would have just hunted for a new snake to do their dirty work, and the cycle would have repeated. No, Bumpy Johnson needed Tim to actually commit to the act. He needed the betrayal to be final. In that moment of ultimate treachery, Bumpy Johnson would reveal the truth, not just to Tim, but to everyone in the building, to the entire neighborhood, and to the crime bosses watching from the shadows. The message would be undeniable. Bumpy Johnson is untouchable because he is always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. It was roughly 11:45 p.m. on the night of July 7th at the Velvet Basement. The place was jammed. Nearly 300 people, musicians, street legends, high society figures, and local leaders, filled the room. A Friday night in the neighborhood meant smooth brass, expensive scotch, and the kind of talk that decided the fate of the streets. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual corner booth, deep in conversation with 2 local politicians about a new community center. He was dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, his signature hat resting on the table next to a glass of premium cognac he hadn't even tasted yet. Tim arrived shortly after 11:30. He had downed a few shots of whiskey, just enough to numb the guilt and stop his hands from shaking, but not enough to lose his edge. Tucked in his blazer was the revolver he had carried for years, the tool he believed was his ticket to $100,000 and a new life. Tim hovered near the bar, tracking Bumpy Johnson's every move. Bumpy Johnson's back was turned, he looked completely exposed, lost in his meeting. At exactly 11:47, Tim began his walk. He cut through the sea of people, his hand buried in his coat, fingers wrapped around the handle. Nobody gave him a second look. Tim was Bumpy Johnson's shadow, he belonged there. Tim moved behind the booth. 6 feet. 4 feet. 2 feet. He whipped out the weapon. The man behind the bar spotted the steel first, his jaw dropping in horror, but before a scream could leave his throat, Tim aimed at the base of Bumpy Johnson's skull and pulled the trigger. Click. The sound of a dead hammer hitting a dud chamber rang out like a thunderclap in the now silent club. The band cut out instantly. Every voice died. Hundreds of people stared in shock at Tim, who stood there with a useless piece of scrap metal in his trembling hand, while Bumpy Johnson remained perfectly still, not moving an inch. Bumpy Johnson took a slow, methodical sip of his drink. He placed the glass back on the table with a soft thud and rotated his chair. He stared at Tim, a look that wasn't filled with rage, but with a crushing sense of pity. "I was counting on you," Bumpy Johnson said, his voice barely a whisper but heard by everyone. Those words destroyed Tim more than a real bullet ever could. In that split second, Tim realized the gravity of his mistake. Bumpy Johnson had seen it all coming. He knew about Rico the recruiter, he knew about the money, and he had orchestrated this entire public downfall. Instead of ending Tim's life or dumping him in the harbor, Bumpy Johnson had allowed him to walk into that club and pull the trigger. He let Tim expose himself in front of 300 witnesses. He let Tim shatter his own name and honor in front of his entire world. The useless gun hit the floor with a hollow thud. Tim's knees buckled, and he collapsed into a heap. "Forgive me, Bumpy," he sobbed. "I'm so sorry. My little girl. Maya." "I know all about Maya," Bumpy Johnson cut him off. His voice was low, but it echoed in every corner of the silent room. "I've known for months. You really think I don't look after my own?" Bumpy Johnson reached into his suit and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. He tossed it onto the table. "Maya's medical costs, every single cent, were paid off at the hospital this morning. There's also a bank draft in there for $10,000 for your family. Just so you can get back on your feet." Tim's eyes were wide and filled with tears. "Then, why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I had to see for myself," Bumpy Johnson replied. "I had to know if you would pick a bag of syndicate cash over our years of friendship. If you would pick their hollow promises over our bond." He paused, the silence heavy. "Now, I have my answer." Bumpy Johnson stood up. He wasn't a giant of a man, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over everyone in the building. "You're leaving this city tonight. Take your wife and your daughter and vanish. I don't care where you go, but if I ever see your shadow again, or if anyone mentions your name, there won't be any mercy. Do you understand?" Tim nodded frantically, his face wet with tears. "And Tim," Bumpy Johnson's voice became a cold whisper, "when the bosses ask you why the job didn't get done, you tell them exactly what happened. You tell them Bumpy Johnson saw it coming. You tell them he's always known. You tell them you can't put a price on loyalty here. And tell them if they ever try to turn one of my people again, I won't be this kind." Tim stood up on trembling legs, grabbed his broken revolver, and stumbled out of the velvet basement. He left the city that very night and never came back. Years later, rumors said he was doing manual labor in a small town out west, a man haunted by the memory of a single click. After Tim vanished into the night, Bumpy Johnson turned to the crowd. 300 people stared at him in awe. They had just seen the impossible. They had watched a man try to kill the king of Harlem, and they had watched the king turn that death sentence into a masterclass in power. "Let me be very clear," Bumpy Johnson said, his voice reaching every ear. "The outsiders think they can purchase us. They think they can break our ranks. They think they can take this neighborhood because they think we're weak or because they think we're desperate." He slowly picked up his glass of cognac. "They are mistaken. This neighborhood isn't on the market. It never was, and it never will be. Anyone who thinks they can stroll into my streets and put a price on my people is going to learn the same lesson Tim just learned. We aren't the ones who need to be looking over our shoulders. They are." Bumpy Johnson lifted his glass high. "To our home, and to a loyalty that gold can't touch." All 300 people in the room raised their drinks in unison. "To the neighborhood." The brass instruments began to wail again. The chatter filled the air once more. Within a few moments, it seemed as if the room had returned to normal, except everything had changed. News of that night ripped through the criminal underworld like a forest fire. By daybreak, every racketeer from the coast to the inner city had heard the tale. Bumpy Johnson had known about the plot for a month. He had let it unfold on his terms. He had forced a traitor to unmask himself in front of a crowd, and he had accomplished it all without firing a single shot or losing a single man. The syndicate leaders called an emergency summit the following afternoon. Lorenzo Valley was livid, not at Bumpy Johnson, but at Rico the recruiter for the humiliating failure. However, Carmine Russo saw the bigger picture. "We can't break this man," Russo said softly. "We've thrown everything at him. Violence failed. Bribes failed. Even turning his closest friend failed. Every time we throw a punch, he's already moved out of the way. He sees it coming before we even think of it. So what's the move?" Valley demanded. Russo sparked his cigar. "We walk away. We keep our business in the other boroughs, but we leave Bumpy Johnson's territory alone. Trying to take that ground is just going to drain our wallets and fill up the graveyards." It was the first time in history the major syndicates had ever retreated from a turf war, but they were out of options. Bumpy Johnson had proved his point at the Velvet Basement. He wasn't just a tough guy, he was a grandmaster at a game of chess everyone else was just learning to play. And you don't challenge a master unless you're prepared to lose everything. The tale of Tim's betrayal became a permanent legend in the streets. People shared it for generations, telling it to their children and grandchildren. It became a masterclass in the meaning of loyalty, the importance of being 3 steps ahead, and the true definition of power. The word moved through the shadows of every city. By the next sunrise, every boss in the country knew the name Bumpy Johnson. During that final meeting of the syndicates, Carmine Russo said the words no one ever thought they'd hear: "Leave him be. We cannot defeat that man." It marked the very first time the major syndicates retreated without a single drop of blood being spilled. Bumpy Johnson ruled for another decade following that legendary standoff. He passed away in 1970, not from an assassin's lead, but from a heart failure. In a twist of fate, it happened right there in the Velvet Basement, the same spot where he had looked him in the eye. But there is a deeper truth here. Bumpy Johnson proved a point that most people overlook. The deadliest tool in a man's kit isn't a firearm. It's the ability to see what's coming before your opponent even moves. It's about flipping their trap into your triumph. It's about playing a high-stakes game of strategy while they're still figuring out the basics. Tim took a bag of cash from the bosses, but he left the city with nothing but a broken spirit. Meanwhile, Bumpy Johnson simply returned to his booth, finished his drink, and remained the undisputed king of the streets. If this story gripped you, do me a huge favor and tap that like button. If you haven't joined the community yet, now is the time. We are bringing you these Bumpy Johnson chronicles daily, and I promise you, the next chapter is even more intense. Leave a comment below. Do you think Bumpy Johnson should have handled the situation differently? Would you have let a man like Tim walk away? Make sure your notifications are active, because next time, we're diving into the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into a rival kingpin's headquarters completely unarmed and walked out with the biggest contract in history. You definitely don't want to miss that one. Remember, in these streets, respect wasn't a gift, it was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned his every single day.